إلهي قد أتيت إلى رحابك مستجيرا.
Many of us know him already. He's a postdoctoral teaching fellow of philosophy at Carnegie Mellon University in Qatar. He's also a visiting lecturer in philosophy at Northwestern University in Qatar. His work focuses on foundational issues arising within the overlapping domains of ethical theory, political philosophy, conflict resolution, and decision theory. With that said, we open the floor for all the guests over here, which is all of you. So anyone can start with any questions, comments, stories they have on the topic. So it begins. Bismillah. If you have any questions, just raise your hands. One of the volunteers will provide you with the mics. Thank you. Alright, sir, so the topic is religion and rationality, in case some of you don't know. And we'll start with Hamza, inshallah.
Excuse me. Sorry.
Brothers, sisters, friends, academics, friends, I greet you the warmest Islamic greetings of peace. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'm not going to give a presentation because we were briefed that we're just going to have a discussion amongst ourselves, questions, concerns, frankness, sincerity, heart-to-heart human discussion, no pre-framing the discussion like, oh, I know who you are, you're one of those crazy, irrational Muslims. I know who you are, you're a neo-atheist, militant neo-atheist. So what I want us to do is to follow what I'm just about to say, inshallah. Now, generally speaking, if you come to Britain, the United Kingdom, and you want to ask somebody, if you were to hear the word Muslim or religion or religious, what would come to mind? So I want to ask you that question. Imagine you're just a normal person living in the UK, and I said to you, if I say the word Muslim or religious, what would come to mind? Wait, put your hands up. Bomb, right? Bomb. Terrorist. Hate. Fight. War. Intolerance. Stories, swords. Anything else? Okay, good. So we have all of this negative emotional connotations to these words. Now let me just flip the script. If I were to say to you the word atheist, what would come to mind? Science. Logic. Irrational. Oh, rational. Dawkins. Monkeys. Like what, atheists are monkeys or? Yes. Skeptics. No brain. Monkeys have brain, atheists have no brain. Okay. Yes. Cynical. Oh, the irrational pretense. You must be a religious guy. Okay, so you see now that we have all these connotations. Now, this is a disaster, don't you think? Because now, when you're going to be speaking to someone, say, for example, oh, hello, Professor Gray, good to see you, and he's a non-atheist, for example, you're going to be engaging with your judgment, you're not going to be engaging with him. And like me, you probably know me for someone who's religious. So if you have all of these connotations, you're going to be engaging with your judgment, you're not going to be engaging with me. And this is no wonder we never understand each other. Because every time we see and speak to each other, we pre-frame each other. So if you're going to pre-frame might as well just speak to yourself, because that's what we're doing. We're speaking to somebody else. We're not speaking to the person. And we must follow, I humbly believe, the prophetic tradition. With the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, upon whom be peace, he would say to his companions, don't talk to me about anybody. Because he wants to engage with them as they should be engaged with, without any reframing, without any historical negative baggage. So if we could start today's Q&A discussion, getting to know each other in that context, I think we'll have a fantastic time. I will learn something, and you will learn something. But if we come to each other with this reframing, because many of us have that, then there's no point. We might as well just have a shawarma and some coffee. But I know you guys are frank, decent human beings, and therefore we'll divorce our drama, our reframing, our historical negative connotations to things, and really engage with one another. Who agrees with this approach? And that's it. That's what I have to say, really. God bless you.
Well, hello everyone. Thank you for coming out today. As was announced, I'm Professor Gray. I'm a philosophy professor. There seems to be a misconception that philosophers must all be godless atheists. I guess that's what I was getting out of this. I have not come here to defend atheism, not remotely. My view of, I believe in religious faith, and my views might be different from our colleagues and from some of you. I fundamentally believe, given the topic here is religion and rationality, I believe that there is this long-standing issue where people seem to believe that to be good, to have value, something must be rational. And that it's an inherent flaw to be irrational, to be emotional. A lot of the negative connotations that came out associated with Islam, irrational, terrorists, all suggest strong emotional responses, strong negative emotional responses. Now, I believe that the emotions play a central role with faith, far more central than rationality. And that emotion is not a negative thing, always happy. That's precisely where faith gets its power. It's from the personal relationship and experience of divinity, and one that, well, it calls you out as an individual, and as such, it's infinitely particular, and as such, next to impossible to directly communicate to another person, except maybe through poetry, song, dance. That's my conception of what it means to have faith. Not atheistic at all. So I just wanted to, just say that's where I start on this, and we can plow forward as we all see fit. But anyway, we open it up to you guys to talk now. We have some.
So I'm going to base the question. So from the two of you, is it rational to believe in God?
It is both rational and irrational. Let me explain why. If we mean by irrational the non-empirical, the non-justifiable, if we mean by irrational that which is extremely personal, then yes, God's existence can be like that. In the Islamic tradition, we believe in something called the innate disposition, called the fitrah, which in the Arabic language comes from the triliteral stem, which however is like fatrun and fatara, that God created something within you to acknowledge God is not a concept, He is a precept. He is necessary, even for you to speak and breathe and move and think. Every time we open our mouths, it implies the precept of the divine reality. So from that perspective, you could call that irrational. So Islam entertains that and says God just is. It's like basically trying to figure out if your mother really gave birth to you. you don't really remember, you just have testimony, but you're never going to deny it. So God from that perspective is very part of who you are. So that's the irrational component. But I believe we have a rational component to prove God's existence. We're going to take too long on this. Let's assume the universe began and we have mathematical, philosophical, and astrophysical evidence to justify that assertion. Universe began. If it began, I believe there are four logical, plausible explanations for this. Number one, it came from nothing or via nothing. Number two, it came into being by its own self, meaning it was self-created. Number three, it was ultimately brought into being by something that was also brought into being. In other words, it was created by something else that was created. Or number four, it was brought into being by something that was never brought into being. Or it was created by something uncreated. I believe as logical, rational human beings, when we assess each of these logical possibilities, we know that the best explanation is that this whole cosmos, this universe, since it began to exist, was brought into being by something that was not brought into being. As Professor, or the philosopher Abraham Barkis in the appendix to Professor Anthony Fleet's book, There Is a God, he says theists and atheists, they agree on something. They agree that something must have always been there. Now the point is, you choose, is God or the universe? But since the universe began, then it must be the divine reality. Now you may think, well, all you've proven here is that there is an uncreated creator. It doesn't mean it's God or Allah or Jesus or Buddha or one of the 4,000 different names we've disagreed on since 6,000 BC Sumeria. You're right. But I think if we do conceptual analysis, we keep on thinking deeply about this, we know if there is an uncreated creator for the entire cosmos, it must be powerful, it must be transcendent, it must be one, it must have a will, it must be perpetually knowing, and you can justify these things through conceptual analysis. Let me just give you one example. How do we know it must be powerful? We'll take one atom in the universe, and we can split that one atom, what happens? We have a release of so much potential energy. How many atoms do we have in the whole entire cosmos? So the one who brought that into being, it follows, must be powerful, have some type of potential power. And you can do that with all of the kind of key attributes that we would attribute to this uncreated creator. So in 3 minutes, I think it's very easy to at least have good reason to believe from a rational perspective that the divine reality exists. And that's one argument. I could probably give you about 8. The argument for consciousness, contingency, the teleological argument of the fine-tuning of the universe to prevent our existence, and so forth and so forth. And one of my favorites is the argument for consciousness. As Professor David Sharma's, he's leading on this at the moment, and he's calling something called the hard problem of consciousness, where physicalism or some kind of materialism, empirical framework can only tell us if we are thinking, if we are tasting something. For instance, I just had that tea. So a scientist from a physicalist perspective can show he is having tea, but they could never say what it means to have tea for me, how it tastes for me. That third-person subjective experience is outside of the scope and domain. And this is why Professor Chalmers and many other philosophers and neuroscientists are saying, we have to suspend this now. We don't have a physicalist outlook to describe the third-person subjective experience, although it is true. It's in our face. So that third-person subjective experience can only be explained by maybe, as Professor Sharma says, property dualism, where you have physical laws and properties of the universe, and you have something called a consciousness property that was always there, which I think is a substitute for God. Anyway, so these are some ideas I'm throwing out there, so thanks for the question.
Short answer, I think it's completely irrational. So why do I say that? He talked of this subjective experience, and I believe that's the core of faith. That religious faith involves, again, a personal relationship with divinity. It's something that involves a relationship. It's either submission, it's love, it's a personal relationship. Now, we can talk about first causes, primary consciousness, and so on. That's not a personal relationship, or doesn't necessitate one. And we can present all these proofs and arguments however we want. That's not going to spontaneously create a personal relationship within you or with anyone. So I saw this movie. It's a terrible movie, but it's called The Vow. I don't know. It's Rachel McAdams and that delightful Channing Tatum. And it's about a husband and wife in a car accident. Wife gets amnesia, forgets, and it's based on a true story. She never remembers marrying this guy. Never remembers falling in love. And so he can give her all the proofs he wants that they were once married in love. Pictures, video recordings, friends and family testifying that yes, indeed, you two were deeply and fundamentally in love. Watch the wedding video. He pursued any proof you want. But at the end of the day, that is not going to make her fall in love again. Because love is an experience. It's not logic. It's not rational. I think about my own relationships and the crazy things that I might do if my wife is, say, in danger, or if I had a child who was starving. That's love. That's submission to something bigger than myself. And that's only magnified a millionfold when dealing with God. One thinks of the story of Abraham and when God asked him to sacrifice his son. There's nothing rational or moral about that. In fact, if I had been Abraham, I would be thinking, am I hearing voices? But no, Abraham has absolute trust that one is a message from God, and two, absolute trust that he's getting the message right, that he has to go sacrifice his son. That's big stuff. That's love, that's submission. That's not rational. I see nothing rational about that. If anything, rationality approaches faith with fear, and that's not faith. Faith is not fear. Faith is love, faith is submission. And there's just not rationality there. I don't see it. I don't think it's needed. Because again, you either have that personal relationship or you don't. There's no argument that's going to create trust in you. And so that's where I think ultimately, look, maybe there's a penumbra of potential rational things, I don't know, but at the core, I see nothing rational to it. And I don't think that's a problem. I mean, this idea, I just read it this morning, this idea that if God is reducible to logic and science, it's not a God, and certainly not a God worth believing in. So that's my story.
I have a question that I asked you today, but do you think that, since we are talking about rationality and religion today, do you think that God is beyond logic? Is God creates logic?
Is God beyond logic? Did he create logic? I don't really know how to answer that question. I think it depends what you mean by logic. Like, for example, are you saying did God create the number one? Like, in a Platonic sense, abstract numbers? You know, these kind of questions, I think, I would argue are slightly irrelevant to the idea that you can have good reasons to believe in something and therefore establish a trust and a personal relationship with that thing. Because I agree with Professor Greg that actually he's right. From the personal, subjective experience in communicating and having divine discourse and love, submission to this divine reality, that is purely subjective, that experience. I mean, to even rationalize it would be to destroy it. It's like trying to write poetry and using someone else's ideas. Poetry is not about that. It's about yourself, your expression. I mean, I write poetry. They're hidden on my webpage with a password. I don't show anybody because I feel if someone else takes that, then it's not that anymore. It was just me. It was not like 7, 8 years ago. It was really low time in my life. I don't know when to read it. I don't know when to touch it because it's so personal. And if they read those words, they won't have the same meaning that I had with those words. So I don't agree. So, I don't know how to answer that question, but it doesn't take away the fact that there are good reasons to believe in the abstract idea that a divine reality exists. But it is true. Most of the kind of personal relationship we have with God is subjective, and it's very deeply personal, and it's existential. That's why existentialism, the post-modern philosophers like Heidegger, Kierkegaard, and others, they wouldn't even really discuss rationality, let's say. They would discuss meaning, because everything we're talking about really is search for meaning, and we are defined as human beings in that search for meaning. Because we have the self-help mantra, you have to know yourself. I think that's rubbish. I really think that's rubbish. And that's not to offend people who like viewing spirituality and self-help books. Yeah? I really believe that it's about losing yourself, not finding yourself. As Bruce Lee would say, just hack away the unessentials. Because when someone's making clay, when he's making an art piece, he doesn't add more clay, he has a big lump that he takes away. And interestingly, if you think about it, the human being is in this search for meaning. Think about a 7-year-old child when he's immersed in play with his friends. 2 hours feels like 2 minutes. Like my son was saying, Baba, it was only 1 minute. What are you talking about? You've been doing this for 2 hours. Because he's immersed in that play, and that's the time to take a picture. It's his natural self. But if I was to say to my son, Zakaria, cheese, he'll freeze and he'll lose that natural self. And in this way, the human being is like the eye. If the eye were to see itself, it would no longer be the eye. It has to look outside. So the human being is defined in search for meaning. And we believe in the Islamic narrative that that meaning can only be found if you find that meaning in God. That would be the ultimate true meaning, the true real meaning, if you like, with inverted commas. And this is why the Quranic discourse says, if you forget Allah, if you forget the divine reality, if you forget God, God will make you forget your own self. Which is very interesting and very existential. So that's my way of following the question.
Can I have a follow-up? Okay. Since you are saying that religion is very subjective, and we have religion...
No, I'm not saying that, I'm saying it's both.
Okay.
I'm saying there's an existential subjective element, but the foundational ideas, they can be grounded in reason, as I justified earlier. That's my view.
So that you assume that the foundational idea cannot or can be rational?
Both.
Okay. So in the irrational part that you are saying that because religion is subjective and people are searching for their meaning. So if somebody does not have that subjective feeling and does not have that subjective experience, then is it okay for him not because he does not have that subjective experience? And another is that in terms of the objective, you are saying that the only possibility that, or possibility, and you said that the self-created and created by created is not logic. But I want to say that can God do something that is out of the frame of logic? Since I think he can, because he is the most great and he can do anything, so that of course he can do something that is not logically true. So that I think maybe the universe has started with a way that is not logically true and cannot be understood logically by us.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, the Islamic theologians in the discussion on this, for example, you have the likes of Al-Qurtubi and the 14th century philosopher theologian Ibn Taymiyyah. They said that God has power over all things, and all things are defined in the realm of logic, meaning what is meaningful. For example, if I were to say to you, a square triangle, is a square triangle meaningful to you? By definition. So, what we say is in the Islamic thought, Islamic philosophy, in the Islamic theological perspective, that the classical tradition would say, God has power over all things. So therefore, things which have actual meaning, things which actually are coherent. Because you have the famous statement, can God create a stone he can't move? I mean, that in itself is irrational, because if you break it down logically, you're basically saying an all-powerful being cannot be an all-powerful being. I mean, from the onset, that statement doesn't make sense. So, from that perspective, I would disagree with you. The other thing that you asked about the subjective experience, if I want to have that subjective experience, is it okay? Well, at the end of the day, we all search for meaning, and you cannot deny that as a human being. I would believe a human being that doesn't search for meaning is not a human being anymore. I think that's what defines us. Even if it's getting a degree, even if it's having an aspiration, a worldly aspiration like curing cancer, or bringing people together, or creating peace, even if it means falling in love with someone, even if it means brushing your teeth in a certain way, I don't know. I mean, something. We all search for that meaning. The irony is, when we say we don't have meaning, then we're assuming meaning in the first place. You can't run away from it. I remember I attended a landmark forum course, and they would say at the end of the course, life has no meaning. But then I would say, but we have to use meaning to say that there's no meaning. Meaning is indispensable. So from that perspective, I think all human beings search for meaning, whether we think we don't or not. That's the perspective. But yeah, we should take a question from Professor Craig.
Alright, so you're saying that faith is all about irrationality. So if someone's curious or interested, they have faith, but they're still interested in finding the rationality behind the existence of God or their choice of religion, does that imply that their faith is not strong enough?
Oh, I can't look into their soul and say that. If it came to me, I would say that this rationality that you seek will not enrich your faith one drop. That's what I would say to them. You can desire it, but at bottom, again, I'll go back to Abraham. If he is indeed the father of all those who have faith, how do you advise him? A voice told me I'm supposed to. God told me I have to sacrifice my son. You saw me with a knife and cleaver and a child. You're like, God told me you got to take care of this. You just let me go and be like, okay. You called the police, I hope. But because Abraham didn't know the story was going to have a happy ending. That's the whole point. And so we can rationalize all you want, but a proof tends to convince someone who's already got that trusting relationship there. And if they don't have it there, the proof is words. Just trust me, I've looked at these arguments. That's what I do. It's my job. They pay me. It's great. And I find none satisfying. And like I said, I don't know what their faith is. It could be the greatest faith of all. They just are greedy and want more. It could be weak. I don't know. I can't speak for the person, but I can say the proofs aren't going to enrich them one. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I had a follow-up in mind. And so there is saying that you find the studies of proving or the existence or the non-existence of God pointless.
If it's to make you believe in God, it's a complete waste of time. Now, that said, I teach all those proofs in my intro to philosophy class because I think they're incredibly valuable proofs to understand, well, just how arguments work. Each proof of God illustrates a different type of reason. From purely logical based, the ontological it's called, it's a very complex argument, to cosmological based on experience, to design, creationism, down to these scientific theories, or at least claim to be scientific theories. And so you learn about reasoning that way. I think that's very important. But I don't have any illusion that anyone's going to believe in God because of that. If they believe already, then they might be persuaded, but I don't think their faith will be enriched at all by that.
Because it's incoherent. I mean, it is a violation of natural law, then it's not a miracle by description, by definition. Because what's a natural law? It's a pattern that we see in the universe. It's inductive. We don't have an infinite number of observations, so maybe we didn't see the pattern properly. Who cares? Maybe it's a glitch, maybe it's part of the pattern, maybe whatever. So that's not a miracle. This is why I believe the Islamic philosophical, Islamic thought perspective of miracle is slightly incoherent. And I'll give you the story concerning Moses, when Moses was at the kind of the discussion, if you like, with the magicians at the court of Pharaoh, and the magicians did the illusions of these illusory snakes made of rope, I believe. And God tells Moses, throw it on the staff. The staff is thrown down, it's a piece of wood, and instantaneously it turns into this real snake that gobbles up the illusions and then chases the Pharaoh, and Pharaoh starts to scream, saying, take him away, right? Now, although this story would have spiritual insight and historical wisdom and gems, but it also gives you a philosophy of miracles, which is that if you think about it, if you take time away, because if you assume it's instantaneous, when the staff was thrown, it's a piece of wood and it turned to a snake. But what's in the snake is not what's in the wood, and nothing was added to it. So from this perspective, a miracle is an act of impossibility from the perspective of it is an event that lies outside the productive capacity of nature. The nature of that particular miraculous event was the staff. The miraculous event is the snake. There is no causal connection. There's no physical causal connection between the snake and the staff in this scenario. So that would be the definition of a miracle. So is that definition coherent logically? I think so. That's a logical, that's a definition that we could work with. Can we find miracles using that definition? I don't know. Historically, yes, with the narratives. But I would believe the Quran is that one living miracle at the moment, especially from a linguistic perspective, because the literary form of the Quran lies outside of the productive capacity of the Arabic language. Because when you exhaust the 28 letters, the grammatical rules and the finite words in the classical tradition, you exhaust them. You would never create the literary form of the Quran. So the Quran, by definition, has no causal physical link to where it came from, which is the Arabic language itself. So by definition, it's a miracle.
I mean, I would largely agree. I mean, I think this might illustrate, though, a difference between Christianity and Islam, where the Christian believes that Jesus is the embodiment of God, and therefore you have the mortal and the immortal, the finite, the infinite, coexisting in the same being, the same place, and that seems paradoxical, to say the least. But perhaps maybe the greatest miracle, and maybe it is paradoxical as well, and that this is shared by all the human faith, is that the most powerful being in the world cares about you. Not humanity as a whole, though I'm sure, us, but you as an individual. Now that's truly amazing, and that's a miracle. Is why.
And this question is from Mr. Ray. From an atheist point of view, what do you think the purpose of life is? Because if there is no God, there is no purpose. Justice doesn't exist. The concept of justice doesn't exist.
I'm not defending atheism.
Let me defend atheism. Now, you know, typically religious folks say, if you don't believe in God, you don't have a purpose. I think that's offensive, frankly. Okay? I used to say that, but it's wrong. The reason being it's wrong is because, again, human beings are defined by the search of meaning. And we have purposes in life. For example, I want to be an engineer, and I want to build bridges in Africa so people don't have to travel miles and go straight in one direction and get the water or food that they need, for example. That can be my purpose. Right? Is that wrong with that? No. The discussion we should have as a religious folk is, do you have an ultimate purpose? Because yes, you can't have an ultimate purpose without the divine, in my view. This is why some of the existential philosophers like John Paul Sartre, when he wrote on nothingness, and things are meaningless, and from meaninglessness, you create your own reality, your own world. For me, I think that's like saying, let's pretend to have an ultimate purpose. But to say you don't have a purpose in life, that's impossible. How do you think Professor going to agree? and it's postdoctorate research. How do you think, why you guys who may not believe in the religion of God actually at university? You think it's just a random accident? No, we actually thought about it. He had some goals and he had a purpose in life. So I think the question should be changed is, can you have an ultimate? That's what you meant. That's right. But I think we should clarify our language because it creates barriers. I remember I did that to my atheist. He was so what do you mean I don't have any purpose? And like, oh, I'm really sorry, I didn't really mean it that way. So I think it's good the way when we talk to each other, we can refine our language.
I would add to that we all face these deeply, so I've been talking about faith as something deeply personal and rational, and I don't see that as a bad thing at all. And maybe the one way to bring it home, because it doesn't have to be about religion, any life decision you make that matters, that's going to define who you are, there's nowhere to look. There's no logical proof, there's only action. You decide, you choose, and it's terrifying. I think, so a little personal story, I'll be quick. When I finished grad school, I had degrees in both computer science and undergrad. I had a bachelor's in both computer science and a bachelor's in philosophy. I had no clue what I was going to do. And so I thought about the university side. I applied to 10 programs in philosophy, 10 in computer science. And I said, well, I'll just, let the universe. The universe got me into all of them. So I was stuck again with having to decide, what am I going to do now? My dad, he wanted me to go computer science. He thought philosophers starve. He was absolutely CS, he always had a job. And this was when the bubble had yet to burst, so tech was very hot. But I remember driving home. My parents lived 2 hours away. I remember driving home, and I was agonizing over this choice because I had to decide. And there was no logical or reason that I liked both. They were great. But I had to decide, what was I going to be? Who was I going to be? And I remember that drive, it just hit me. I had to do philosophy. I was called, I guess. And I did it. My dad, the tear in his eye started growing. But I got a job, so it turned out to have a happy ending. But that to me is, while that's a personal decision about my own life, again, religious faith is the same, acknowledges, but on a much grander scale. And so I think there is this temptation, like I said at the beginning, there's this temptation, I think, because it's irrational, it must be bad. Every important decision you make is going to be irrational. Do you marry this person, that person? Do you listen to so-and-so? Do you follow your heart? No one can tell you what to do except yourself.
Yes, this question is for Dr. Hamza. Our brother Hamza. I'm very sorry. Anyways, you obviously converted from a non-Muslim to Islam, right? So can we hear that story and why you converted?
The reason I can't answer that now is a story, it's a very subjective and personal, and to give it in 2 minutes would be a joke. It would relate to the whole story and it would lose its meaning. It's like reciting one of the best poems in the world, that's about 3 pages, in like a second. You know, the taste that we didn't understand it. Not to say the story is so profound, I'm saying it's a great story, but it's like, this always happens. Sometimes when I have 2 minutes left, after a lecture, we go for Q&A, question and answers, and there's like 1 minute left, and someone says, can you tell us why you converted to Islam? I'm like, thanks. Yeah, I can't really answer that. Thanks.
I want to ask Dr. Gray, what do you think if someone says, when my personal emotion conflicts with science, I'm going to go with science because, for example, I don't want to worship God because it doesn't exist. I also want to make a point, in Islam, there's plenty of emotions, but what we try to do is have emotions while in logic.
Well, to start with where you ended, I think you're treating your own religion, I assume you're Muslim, as a monolith that it is not. He named some very serious, and I can name more, Arabic philosophers who took demonstrating God's existence very seriously, but there were several who thought that was literally incoherent. The book is called The Incoherence of the Philosopher's thought this are in a very similar position to me. The Sufis, they believe that there's no need to talk about reason with faith. And indeed, their activities in spinning, these rituals they go through, are precisely supposed to promote that ecstasy. Read the poetry of Rumi, man. That is beautiful stuff, and that can be, I agree 100% with that understanding. There's no treatise that Rumi wrote to say, here's why you should believe. No, he's telling you how it feels. Now, your person who's looking for science, they don't feel it, man, and nothing I say is going to change their mind. They have to find these things themselves. Again, he can tell stories, and I think that's very important. He's not going to give you a logical argument about why you converted. It's going to be a very personal experience. And some people have that. David Hume did say the greatest miracle was that anyone would believe. He was probably being very mean, but I think we can take that very positively as well. So again, look, if you want science, take it. You can build bridges. We need bridges. Program a computer, great. But where you're going to find meaning, whether it's in God or outside, as I said, is what you're going to do after your degree, that's going to be a similarly personal and not necessarily rational decision. You go with your gut, man.
Just want to add something very quickly. I think the Quran gives us the middle ground here. Like the Quranic discourse mentions knowledge over 100 times, mentions aql, the intellect, many, many times. And interestingly, when it mentions these things, it not only relates to creedal things, but also things like morals and meaning. So, Ibn Taymiyyah, the 14th century theologian, he actually wrote a treatise on the aql and the naql, meaning that the aql, the intellect, the sound intellect, aql and salim, the sound intellect doesn't contradict the text, the naql, the basis of the text. Because whatever comes from truth is true, whatever comes from rationality is rational, even if it seems from its fruits irrational, but you can trace it to a rational basis. So he said there is no difference between the sound intellect aql and the naql, the text. It's unfortunate in the real world, sometimes we just have naql heads. Yeah? We just follow the text without using your brain. But the Quran tells us to use your brain. أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ? Do they not use their intellect? Do they not reflect within themselves? يَتَفَكَّرُونَ? Those who reflect, which comes from the trilateral stem, فَكَرَى, which basically means the thing that you're reflecting upon, inquire deeply about its implications. So in a way, it's as if the Quran is trying to build the bridge between this excessive rationality and this excessive emotionality, if that makes sense, right? So I think somehow, I don't think there's one or the other. I think there is some form of link. And that's what the Quran is trying to tell us. And, you know, if you were to speak to some scientists, they find meaning in abstract proofs, right? They find meaning in scientific discovery because they don't just look at what is, they just therefore from that derive the implication of what is. And the implication of what is can actually be some kind of faith. For example, scientists have faith. I know this for sure. I mean, scientists will say, we believe in science because it works. We don't know if it's going to work tomorrow, logically, right? But it's been working, so let's continue the program. So you need faith in everything. Now we can say you need more faith to be an atheist than someone who's not an atheist. Honestly, faith is indispensable to everything, whether you have faith or not. Because take, for example, induction. Very basic. If you study induction on a practical level, induction is you take a limited set of observations and you conclude from the next observation, which is weak induction, or the entire set of observations, which is strong induction, okay? You need to have faith. You need to say, well, I trust this limited experience to conclude from the next experience. That, in my view, as David Hume said, is faith in a way. That's faith too. So you need faith for everything, man. So have faith.
I would just challenge that last point. I think comparing, because he's right in the sense that there's issues with science, with making presumptions that what we've seen in the past will hold in the future as a philosopher. We're well versed in that. And to say there is trust in that, I agree with that as well. But I think to put that on par with belief in divinity with religious faith, I think it makes faith banal, religious faith banal, trivial, and uninteresting, unworthy of the name religion. So while I agree that there's trust involved, it's very different to trust math, trust logic. I tell my students to do that, they do. But that's very different than saying trust God, because math is never going to ask you to do something that you might normally believe is absolutely wrong. Whereas religion goes beyond all that, beyond good and evil. I think Rumi's quote is, where there's the plains of right and wrong, I will meet you beyond there. So I don't like the comparison, the equating of the two. I see the analogy, but I think it's not for religion's benefit. I think it makes it common and trivial.
From a religious perspective, we believe according to what our religion teaches us. Where do people who don't believe in the divine go for guidance? Do they do what is right according to other people, or to themselves? Or if so, how can they be successful?
Well, you can take an ethics class. We at least talk about where you're asking where right and wrong comes from, right? And so there's many different theories about it. My own, again, this is not religion now. For me, this is right and wrong. Now that I do believe the best we can hope for is an argument. Why is that? Because ethics involves other people and how you treat them. Now, religious faith is very personal, so I don't hold it to the same. It's beyond that. Like I said, it's beyond right and wrong, good and evil. But if you want to talk about how do we structure ourselves in a society, how do we treat each other? Now that can come from many different sources. In ethics class, you'll see a lot of different ways, and some rely on God, some don't. So it's a very broad question, but ultimately I believe the correct moral theory is the one that has the best reason to defend it in the short answer.
I'm going to do something that atheists would hate and use their own theories to support religion. That if you look at all the great religions, it's there, except that they have been constantly adapting to keep them relevant to the occurrences of that period. And I think right now we're at a critical junction in human history where interaction between different cultures and different faiths is more profound than it's ever been before. And I wanted to ask you to, from the perspective of a faithful human being of any religion, how can you move forward in today's day and age? What things are important to keep your faith strong in the face of what could be seen as challenging interaction or increasing pace of technological advancement?
That's a good question. I think the first thing to do that we have a huge internal recipe to swallow. Although I do follow the Prophetic tradition that says there is khayr in the ummah, which means there is goodness in the religious community. But we have a lot of house cleaning to do. We point fingers a lot, we become victims, we blame the West, the neo-colonizers, we blame this, that, and the other, but we're forgetting when we point the finger, 3 fingers are pointing back. And I think we have really developed a disempowering philosophy in the Muslim community, that it's us and them, and it's their fault, and everyone's oppressing us. I think that's weak, and it's nowhere in line with the prophetic discourse. When you see the 23-year prophetic history, never blamed anybody, never gave power to anybody, always attributed power to God. And this is why his companions thought they could change the world even when they had nothing. They were empowered human beings. So we need a lot of house cleaning to do. We need to also realize as Muslims that it's not about what you wear and what your face looks like, you know, having a beard. Even goats have beards. You know, beard is dead protein. Yeah? Now, we have to realize the reason we do those things is because it's an internal ikhlas, sincerity, niyyah, intention to please worship, love God and you love the Prophet Muhammad upon whom be peace. You know, we take the external, we become, without any offense, overly rabbinical. When you study rabbinical studies, you see over 613 laws. Although, don't get me wrong, Jews have a very internal spiritual tradition as well, which if you see is being revived at the moment. But we become very external, we lose the internal. I think we have to bring them both together. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that I think we have to do, we have to articulate a positive case for our tradition in a way that's relevant. For example, if I believe, and I really feel strongly about this, anyone studying Islamic economics, like the macroeconomic theory of Islam, they will be so amazed and they will think this is the solution to global poverty. We found it. It existed 1400 years ago. And I'm telling you, if anyone studies like the 7 major principles of Islamic economic theory, macroeconomic theory, they're so human, they transcend religion, it's for everyone. And it would work. And I'm not talking about Dubai Islamic finance, right? That's capitalism with a beard. Yeah? That's capitalism with a turban. That's rubbish, no offense to anyone who's from Dubai. But we need to call a spade a spade. We are talking about correct geopolitical theory. The Prophet Muhammad, upon whom be peace, is in a prophetic tradition. The son of man, son of Adam, the human being, is essential limited needs of food, shelter, and clothing, which creates an economic philosophy of distribution. Compare that to the neoliberal capitalist laissez-faire economic theory of there's too many needs, not enough resources. Oh, is that really true? That's false. It's a false geopolitical model. It's false. Because when we study, go to the UN, go to the Food Agricultural Organization, we have enough calories on this planet to feed 2 planet people. 2! But why are people dying of obesity in the United Kingdom and America? But millions are dying because they have no food. The problem is the distribution of wealth. Islam came to solve that problem of the distribution of wealth. Zakat, sadaqah, removal of interest, denying the crazy fractional reserve banking, which by the way, only the bankers benefit and we don't, generally speaking. We have a boom or bust crisis all the time. And it's such an ethical tradition. Study Islamic economics, and you were like, this is what we need for humanity. Because the real terrorism, and I'm not belittling other forms of terrorism, I'm not killing any innocent human beings, like killing the whole of humanity. But I strongly believe the real terrorism is economics. Go to the UNDP report. Why do we have millions of children dying because they have no food? Millions! And it could be resolved. It's not that it's necessary evil. Think about these people. So if you're an ethical human being, check out Islamic finance. And just to summarize it, I'll give you the words of Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, one of the caliphs of Islam in history. He said, "O people, put wheat on the top of the mountains, so the other people don't say that we kept the birds hungry." Not the people, the birds. This is why in the Uthmani Khilafah, the Ottoman period, go to the mosques in Istanbul, and you see the historian will tell you that little baskets of gold, gold baskets full of gold, and the rich would give as charity, and the poor would take how much gold they need for the day. The historians conclude that those baskets were always full. Meaning, for the first time in history, under state boundaries, everyone had food, shelter, and clothing. Say that to the 80,000 homeless people in the United Kingdom, or say that to the people in Chicago, downtown, where they only go to school just to have one meal. Or say that to the people in Philadelphia in the projects, where someone had to ravage into the dirt to find some money or to find some food. Or they should come to Qatar, yeah? Yeah. Before the oil runs out. And before the kings eat it up as well. But that's true, and this is where the humanistic tradition of Islam, Islamic economics, has something strong to say. David Cameron, the Prime Minister, just recently there was a forum on Islamic finance. They called it Sharia-compliant economics in London, and David Cameron said, we want London to be the #1 Sharia-compliant institution, place in the world, London. It's so funny, because the whole of the British media always say Sharia is a bad thing. But the reason he's saying that is because he was Qatari money. But the point is, there's things like this that we have to talk about. This is something very real, it's very close to my heart. I know I've been known to discuss like God's existence, proving the Quran, but I think that's frankly rubbish. It's a bit abstract. Maybe we need it sometimes. But let's talk about how Islam can help humanity. And economics is the way forward, I believe, inshallah. Thanks for listening.
Well, we're talking about a lot of great stuff and Islam, Islam culture and the economy of Islam. At the same time, we thought that we can understand justify Islam based on rationality and science. So just a question, why do you find a lot of Muslim communities who is discussing whether women should drive or not, while not focusing on the essence of Islam, like working hard, improving ourselves? Is there a problem in teaching people Islam?
Cultural phenomenon. And we have to be very careful as Muslims. We have a hard working ethic. And we have to also be very careful as well. We have to understand that the world doesn't work the way that we think it should work, that we have everything on plate. We need to work hard, we need to think hard, and we need to be people of spiritual practice. Because we become fat countries, are like the most obese people in the world now. In Ramadan, 1,000 people went to hospital because they ate too much. I mean, what is this? Is this Islam? No, it's not. It's a cultural, crazy practice. And the point is, we need to go back to our spiritual tradition, and it will solve so many of our problems. Take Qatar itself. A Qatari woman can't marry a non-Qatari man. So what's with that, people? What is with it? I'm telling you, my father is not a Muslim. My sister was engaged to a Turk for 10 years. Is he better than a Muslim? I mean, what happened to our tradition? There's no asabiyya, no nationalism. The Prophet Muhammad, the Prophet, he said, nationalism is under my foot. But yet, someone can marry someone else because they come from a different tribe. Tribalism has affected us. We don't have a concept of boundaries in Islam. Do you know that? Traditionally, we just state frontiers, because they're always moving. But the point we have to understand is we didn't see, our immigration policy, Islamic immigration policy is, Yallah, ahlan wa sahlan, come, everybody, black, Jew, grey, green, alien, you're from Mars, come. Take the Jewish rabbi, there's a letter in the book called Constantinople, written by Philip Mansour. In 1453, when the Jews were persecuted in Europe, look what the rabbi says. "Oh my brothers, oh my brethren, come to the land of the Turks, rich are the fruits of the earth. We're not oppressed with heavy taxes and we live in peace and freedom." Come on. I was in UAE, right? I was in Dubai, and there was a Bengali lady cleaning the toilet. She's there from like 6 in the morning to 1 in the morning at night. And she was complaining to us. We gave her some money, and she said, I was supposed to be a nurse, and my contract was to be here for a nurse, and I could visit my children at least 3 times a year. Her contract is a slavery contract. We have New Age slavery in places like this. Is this Islam? Tell me. I don't attack people. I don't attack cultures. I don't attack anything. I'm Muslim. My mom's from Cyprus. She's a refugee from the 1974 war. My dad was born in Athens, and I'm a Greek, and I'm a Muslim. There's a cocktail of stuff going on, right? And I look Pakistani. There you go. So the point is, we have to really fix home. Stop pointing the fingers. It's a disempowering victimhood mentality. And if we clean up, I think we could be a beacon of light for the world. Truly, especially when it comes to economics. Just just like when Turkey was the sick man of Europe, the Uthmani Khilafah, the Ottoman Empire, Abdul Hamid II, when he was the sick man of Europe, when there was the potato famine, he sent money and food to the Irish so they don't starve. And I think it was Queen Elizabeth, she was embarrassed. This is what we're supposed to be doing, people. Not buying football clubs, okay? But dealing with human problems. No offense, people. Sorry? Yeah, they should. What not? She got twice, 3 times, she's a mother, she has children. What's wrong? That's our ethical tradition in Islam. We don't just basically do things just because that's how it should be done. We are here to change reality. We're not here to conform to reality. We're here to make it more ethical. That's it. Well, the contract says she's going to be a nurse, but she ends up cleaning the toilets. That's very nice, isn't it? You think that's moral? Yeah, well done, so we agree. Alhamdulillah. Anyway, sorry for the rant. Apologies. But I think, there's some sense in it.